Welcome to another Flip video lesson. This is for lesson 8.9 through 8.10, and this is all about how the delegates of the Constitutional Convention decided how the President of the United States of America would be chosen. Let's begin, shall we? Now, once the delegates knew that they needed an executive branch, or someone who would be in charge of making sure the legislative branch, their laws would be put into place, they had to figure out how many men should be in charge. Well, first they thought there should be 3 people. But that's kind of like a three-headed beast, and 3 people in charge isn't always the best because they can have a lot of friction and arguing, so they dropped that idea. They decided they just wanted 1 person in charge. 1. James Madison said that a good government needed clear, timely, and responsible leadership. And you could only have that in 1 person. Think about it this way. Clear. If I have 3 people who are in charge of making sure the laws are done properly, they may not agree on actually how to do that. They may each say something entirely different, which would confuse a lot of people. The reason why it's not very timely is, well, you have 3 people to talk about laws and how the law should be done. That's going to take a long time to get that figured out. And responsible, what if you have 2 of the 3 who just aren't that trustworthy? So that is why currently we have just 1 person in charge of the executive branch, 1 president. Now, this isn't just to say that we didn't have fears, or they didn't have fears, of having 1 leader. 2 words, King George. Remember what he did to the American colonies? They were afraid that a president could end up being just like good old King George III. They also feared that 1 leader might be too fond of war. And if there were 3 or even 2, maybe they'd equal each other out. They also felt that maybe 1 leader might be, too ambitious, wanting too much power for him or herself. And as a result, they would grab all that power, which again, if you had 2 or 3 people, would be harder to do. After deciding that they would have just 1 person in charge, their next decision was, how do we choose the president? Well, they had a couple of ideas. First off, they discussed whether or not Congress should choose who is in charge of the executive branch. However, there were a few problems with that. Some of the delegates pointed out that a president may feel like they had to always side with Congress. Well, because, Congress chose this person, so they may feel indebted to them. Kind of like if a friend does something really nice to you or gives you something, and then they make it seem like you owe them something. They felt like the president may feel like that with Congress, which was a bad choice. Bad decision. Next off, they thought, well, maybe we should let the people decide who should be president. There's actually 3 reasons why that was not a good call. First, they felt that the people were too ill-informed. That's just a polite way of saying that the people had no information. They were kind of dumb. Second off, they felt that the people would only vote for the possible presidents who came from their own state. Again, not a good choice because the person from Massachusetts may not be as good as the person from, let's say, New Jersey. But all the Massachusetts people are going to vote for their own person. The last thing they thought of was people from the more populated states would always win, or would have a greater chance of winning compared to compared to potential presidents from smaller states. Why don't you take a look at this really cool chart I found. This is the population distribution during this time. Just a fancy way of saying, or actually for it's nowadays, I'm sorry. Just a fancy way of saying where people live. And if you look, we have a lot of people living in this part of our country. So if we voted just based on purely from the citizen standpoint, this part of our country would have all the power, and they would always decide who was our president because there's just so many people living there. Whereas if you look in these states right here, there's hardly anyone living here. They would never have a chance of saying who got to be president because so many people lived over here. Their vote really wouldn't count. And that's what the Constitutional Convention people were trying to avoid. Well, there was a final choice. They decided that citizens would not directly vote for a president, but they would vote for electors. These men would then vote for whoever the president would become. The electors were supposed to be the wisest, brightest, and most informed men. Now I want you to pause the video for a moment, and I want you to think about, why are these traits important? Why would the people, the electors, need to be wise, bright, and well-informed? Also, I want you to think about, back to this slide here, why would people be too ill-informed back in the 1700s to choose a president for themselves? Why would me, a citizen, have to vote for an elector who would then vote for the president? Pause the video and I want you to think about those questions. Hopefully you thought about that, and hopefully what you decided was, back in the late 1700s, there was no email, there were no telephones, newspapers took forever to get to people. So people in, like, let's say Florida would have a hard time hearing the president or the person who wanted to be president in Connecticut talking. Information would just take way too long. Florida wasn't a state, by the way, so I should have said South Carolina. Now, the electors would vote for two men. Why two men, you ask? Well, whichever one person got the most votes would be the president. The second place finisher would be the vice president. Each state had as many electors as Senate and House representative delegates put together. So this map here shows all of the electors in 2016. So in Washington State, we have 12 people voting for president. So we get to vote. 12 people. California has 55 electors. Texas, 38. Vermont, only 3. Montana and the Dakotas, 3 each. So it's kind of interesting. We're going to have an essay here in a little bit. It's going to talk more about the Electoral College, which you will understand it more by the end of it. I want to end with this question. Why might the Electoral College seem outdated now? And if you're not sure on the answer, look back to, slide number 4. About some of the reasons why they didn't allow just people and citizens to vote for the president. All right, thank you. The flip video questions are in Edmodo. See you in class.